Hello, good afternoon or evening. This is the research proposal for Scott Ness, Masters of Education candidate in the ITI or in the ITL program with National University. I'll be recording the narration for 4 of the slides that accompany this PowerPoint and then submitting it through the Blackboard portal. So the first of the 4 slides that I'll be providing narration for is this slide for the literature review. The major reason I focused on showing this one is the research process for this particular topic was quite interesting for me. I began this research topic actually early in my credential program, drawing on past knowledge and expertise that I had to come up with an idea for how I might be able to make grammar more interesting and accessible to students, as I was working originally only on an English language credential. I later went on to get a physics credential and then get my first teaching job as a physics teacher, which makes the ending of my research, the implications of this particular research project on my teaching a little bit less direct, but I'm going to start here. So the concerns I encountered for this topic, both at my student teaching site and in the research, pointed to an idea that over-reliance on mobile phones and connectivity through mobile phones was having significant negative impacts on literacy, on language acquisition, on social ability, and on cognitive development. Generally, that mobile phones and the technologies associated with them had severe, extensive, and pervasive negative impacts. Digging into the research, I found little empirical evidence backing up a lot of that. There was little actual evidence backing up the idea that increased phone usage was showing a clear correlation with social interaction or social behavior. The evidence was more suggesting that it was showing changes in how that happened rather than clearly positive or negative impacts. Narrowing into a focus that I could take into a research program, I then focused in on, was texting negatively impacting students' abilities to write? Again, I found conflicting information. I found information suggesting that the amount of textisms or texting specific formations that were appearing in academic writing was on the rise overall, but that individuals who frequently texted were not more likely to have textisms appear in their academic writing than ones who did not. That indicated more of a wider exposure to textisms rather than a direct connection between textism usage and textism presence in academic writing. Digging further into it, it became clear that texting was a tool that could be used to increase cognitive development in younger children, whereas heavy texting use in adults was correlated with diminished cognitive load and diminished cognitive flexibility, suggesting that there's a point at which the benefits of texting behaviors begins to diminish, or a transition from that to a higher state needs to occur to continue that growth. This led me to the idea of texting or textees as a bridge between BICS and CALP. The textees bridge hypothesis posited in this research study is based off of textees' emphasis on brevity and its lack of embedded context, both of which are demanded in a lot of academic writing, in particular writing required in high school. This lines up then with the holes in the current and our current knowledge. TextEase is a rapidly changing technology, and it's a rapidly changing set of registers, and data from 10 years ago is likely invalid at this stage because the technologies used for that communication have changed so dramatically that it is difficult to generalize information from that long ago into the research going on today. On top of that, there's very little study that gets into granular analysis of how individual textisms impact cognitive load, academic writing, the thought process and the communication process going in. It's clear that reducing initialisms, omissions, abbreviations heighten the cognitive load for the sender and the receiver, created a more deeply compact encoded message that then needs to be unpacked accurately on the other side. While on the flip side, omission of apostrophes and other time-saving textisms do not have those positive correlations, and there's simply insufficient data currently to make a strong model of how TextEase is impacting students at that granular level. Also, there is very little information on how TextEase usage can be of harm or benefit to ELLs. The only English language learner data that I could find specifically about TextEase use was primarily from locations outside of the United States, where I had that similar observation of TextEase being used as a place in between more informal forms and academic forms for individuals whose English level was not at a point where they were comfortable in using CALP formations. Skipping to our methodology, moving back a slide real quick, this slide is covered extensively in the paper, so this one will not be covered in the narration. However, moving into the instruments and measurements, this is one that the narration example can dive into. This particular research proposal identifies multiple measures to produce a highly granular case study that can then be used itself as a pilot of a larger study. The goal of this proposal is to create a proof of concept research study that could dig into the issues that I was just discussing from the literature review. The lack of comprehensive granular data, the lack of English language learner specific information, and as such, a standard of academic writing needed to be identified. Partially due to working with it in my student teaching, and partially due to the fact that it is currently the California academic writing standard that is used to assess learners at the high school level. The CASP interim assessment performance task was selected here. The performance task specifically is a composition activity in which students are required to read, process, and produce information about a specific topic. This allows for analyzing TextEase interference through combing through the examples of the performance tasks and identifying textisms, frequency of individual textisms, and correlating that with texting behaviors as reported in transcripts and surveys from students. It also allows the study to get a baseline idea of how much students are expected to be growing over the course of a 10th grade semester in their academic writing. By taking a pre- and post-assessment in a control class using current best practices, the study will be able to get an idea of the type of growth expected for a normal class and compare it against new practices, creating a standard by which new studies could be measured without needing to recreate that control in every case. Moving down, the Woodcock-Johnson cognitive assessment has moved into a 4th edition. This study intends to use the 3rd edition of the test, mostly to line up with the only other study that attempted granular data to add to the growing body of research there. It would be valuable to go back and reproduce that previous study and this portion of the current of this proposed study using the Woodcock-Johnson 4th edition, as the more updated study will be able to draw parallels to current day research in control groups, in a broader audience. However, for this study, the Woodcock-Johnson 3rd edition was selected, again, in order to be able to line up with and compare results from the only other granular study that's been done of Textese's impact. The primary research question of the study is, does the impact of Textese differ from ELLs to non-ELLs? And as that previous study was done using the Woodcock-Johnson 3rd edition, the new study being done with the Woodcock-Johnson 3rd edition can be used to check for potential sources of error with the non-ELL population, thereby ensuring that the ELL population data can be generalized to that previous study and used to establish real differences should they exist. Moving into surveys and interviews, 2 different types of surveys will be used throughout this research program. One type of survey will simply be asking students to self-report their Textese usage. One of the assumptions made in this study is that participants will be honest and forthcoming in these reports. These surveys will mostly check things like frequency of texting, individuals who get texted with, whether it's primarily used for friends, for social communications, for arranging meetups and things like that. And in the second type of survey that will be employed is specifically about student and participant feedback on both the pilot and the control groups. Motivation is an important factor in an area that would be very interesting to study on its own with regard to this piloted program, as my original hypothesis before conducting any research and narrowing this into a master's level theory is that making a more directly student relevant grammar program would allow students to access skills they already have, apply them to the classroom, and increase their intrinsic buy-in in doing so. The participant feedback surveys and interviews here allow for checking those as one of the secondary questions in this program, but also allow for a more in-depth crunch on what's working and not working for different types of students. And the last instrument and measure used here is corpus analysis of student-generated textees. This idea was borrowed from a previous study, which was, again, the only naturalistic study I could find of Textese usage by adolescents and its impact on cognitive ability. What was very interesting about that study was that certain individual textisms show positive correlations with cognitive ability and some showed negative correlations. Reproducing that study and seeing if those trends hold true for both ELL and non-ELL students is one of the primary focuses of this study. In addition, increasing the body of knowledge and checking to see if those trends, which are already 3 years old, are still true with the additions of new technologies in a very rapidly changing linguistic form, itself is a relevant and useful aim of this study. The third slide that will be narrated here is the timeline of the study. This study aims to take place over a 12 to 14 week span within a single semester of an English classroom for 10th grade students. In the first 3 weeks of class, students are still getting adjusted to the class, still getting to know what things are. This is leading into the pre-assessment period. The pre-assessment period begins in about the third week of classes. After students have adapted, they've overcome the loss of skill and that is associated with long breaks, such as the summer and winter recess, and they have gotten back into the swing of school. This helps cancel out some of the noise that could be caused by those breaks when checking for growth over a semester later. The pre-assessment data involves a CASP interim assessment, which will be beneficial to student participants even if the rest of the program proves less beneficial, as additional interim assessments will prepare them for the CASP later on. It also involves the initial administration of the Woodcock-Johnson 3rd edition cognitive exams and collection of Textes data in the form of student surveys. Moving into the weeks 4 through 7, this is where the class is split into the control and pilot groups. However, both groups will be collecting Textes corpus to be used in the analysis. For the control group, the Textes corpus will be collected, and then that will be the end of any explicit or implicit inclusion of Textes in the classroom. For the pilot class, that Textes corpus will be collected and then used to generate activities in which students examine, analyze, discuss, and eventually code switch Textes using the forms and formats that are actually used by the students in the classroom. This is when students will be directed towards certain textisms that research suggests are more valuable when they're formulating their code switching versus those that are less valuable. For example, as mentioned earlier in this narration, the dropping of apostrophes and lack of capitalizing of I's in the letter I, the word I, were negatively correlated with cognitive impact. So the Textes code switching will acknowledge that those would be true Textes forms, but would still correct those, as those are not currently identified as beneficial Textes forms. As students transition through those, they move into the post-assessment period towards the end, at which point the pre-assessments are repeated so that they can be used to track for growth and used to test for statistical differences between different population groups. The data analysis is covered better in the paper than I can cover here, so we will move from that into implications for practice. Again, I've covered a lot of the implications for future research, so instead I will move into the implications for my current teaching practice. As I mentioned in one of the earlier narrations for this video, I have found myself teaching science, whereas I had envisioned myself teaching English at the beginning of this project. As such, I had not expected to be able to implement any of the ideas I found in this research program. However, I have managed to implement some of them in using Textes as a summary tool for students to summarize writing and ideas that they have encountered so that they can crunch information down into smaller forms that they can better digest, which we can then work on as taking that crunched form and unpacking it into the more scholastic academic answers they're going to be expected to make later on. So the major modification I made is taking the format of Cornell notes and substituting the summary section of the Cornell notes as text it to me. So they take the summary, and the instructions are write the text message you would send if someone asked you this question in a text. Whereas above, they have all the information that they unpacked that they would use to answer it in the class. As we move further into the semester, we're going to move into a find the information, text the answer, explain the answer, using our claim evidence reasoning format that it is used throughout our school. This is the sample narration for Scott Ness's Masters of Education research proposal. I hope it has been, well, at least interesting, and have a good afternoon or evening.